Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. This is episode 24, a very special episode with a very special host. That's me, Jeff Seltzer. Today, going to talk all about what was the year 2024, going to rank in terms of streaming the top 10 or maybe 11 episodes of the year. Going to talk through some of my personal highlights of the year, some learnings that I've had and also some things I'd like to do in 2025. As right now it is, the end of December, it is natural to look at the year we just finished as well as the year ahead. So definitely a lot of thinking to do and a lot of planning out to do. So first of all, like always, like to thank all of my listeners and viewers. Thank you so much for joining. If this is your first time, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you found the podcast. Definitely shoot me a note if you could on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. Let me know how you found the podcast. Let me know what you think of the podcast. If you'd like to be a guest or have a topic you want me to talk about, definitely comment on that as well. Shoot me a DM. Let me know. Looking for guests currently booking out for 2025. Would really, really appreciate it. Want to learn from people, hear from other people as well. If this is not your first time listening, thank you for coming back. Really appreciate it. As always, I am on all podcast platforms, so definitely make sure to share it with your friends, your neighbors' friends, and your friends' neighbors. We are on Spotify. We are on Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Castbox, Good Pods, Pandora. Pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found is where this podcast can be found. As a reminder, we are available on video on Spotify as well as on YouTube. So please, make sure to take a look at that. And thank you, as always, for joining. In terms of social media presence, as mentioned before, my Instagram for the show is at Everybody Has a Story Pod. Personal Insta at Seltzer77. You can directly reach the show via email at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. And as always, for all things Jeff Seltzer, you can find me over at jeffseltzer.com. Lots of cool content there, lots of cool media and stuff like that. Firstly, before I get into the show, wanted to give a quick shout out to Daniel Ireland, who just turned 40 years old this past week. You may remember he was in episode 4 as myself, him, and my other buddy Steve talked about our week in Philadelphia, largely going to GCW wrestling, went to WrestleMania. We did, I think it was 13 shows in 5 days. What I will say is I thought really, really intriguing and actually really innovative was at work last week, there was a surprise birthday party for Daniel for his 40th birthday party. Yes, me and Daniel do work together. One of our coworkers was putting together a trivia game. And I hadn't even thought about this before, but to learn more about Daniel, she actually used ChatGPT on episode 4 of this podcast to pull out as many insights as she could about Daniel. So one of the trivia questions that they had was, how many shows did Daniel go to in Philadelphia when he was in town for WrestleMania back in April? Which, again, the answer was 13, as mentioned before. So shout out to Erin if she's listening. I thought it was really, really cool, really great. Probably the first time that this podcast has been used with AI. So that was really, really cool. With that said, I did want to get into the top episodes for this year. So a lot of times when shows on the air, on TV, on radio do a best of, they oftentimes literally just show clips or play clips of the show. To be perfectly honest, I am a little too lazy to go back and cut up all 23 episodes I've done so far and just kind of put it out there. So I figured what I would do is I would go through the top 11 shows just in order, just talking about them, starting with number 11, and give some insights into the show, kind of how it happened, how it got put together, my thoughts on it, any complications, my overall thoughts on the show, how I felt about it, and stuff like that. So what I will do is I'm going to start with episode number 11. Now, most of these types of shows or rankings go in 10 down to 1. Number 11 was very close to 10. It was only about a stream or two off. So I wanted to talk about it and give it the credence that it deserves. Also, it was a lot of fun to record an episode that was ranked number 11. So I wanted to talk about that one too. So the number 11 episode in terms of my top, let's say 11 episodes streamed for this year was episode number 12, Halloween Horror Nights with John Germain. So this was a great episode, I thought. Over the summer when the podcast started, I had reached out to my buddy John and asked him if he'd want to be on the podcast at some point. John doesn't generally do, let's say, podcasts or conversations like this and stuff like that. He's a great guy. He just doesn't generally get out there or, want to put his voice out there. So initially we had talked about just doing like a best of movies at the end of the year. Now, the last 2 years, myself and John have gone together to Halloween Horror Nights down in Universal Orlando. So I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of give another perspective on it. I've been going down to Orlando, Florida for Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights since 2012, I think it was. So I've gone, what, like 12 or so consecutive years. I have my perspective, but I'm always curious to hear what other people think about the houses. So for me, this was a lot of fun. Additionally, I mean, John's a great friend of mine. I thought John came across really, really well. As soon as the podcast came out, I sent the link out to all of his friends and all his family, and they were all just blown away by how great John was on the podcast. So for me, I think this podcast was special to me in a couple of ways. Number one, I was able to kind of reminisce about a trip that myself and a friend of mine had taken down to Florida for the festivities, which I thought was amazing. Number two, it gave a friend of mine the opportunity to come outside of his shell, let's say, and talk about his thoughts. And again, he did an amazing job. I knew that he would, but he hit it out of the park. So, John, shout out to you. Thought it was amazing. And again, number three, the fact that, this is everybody has a story. My story is I go to Halloween Horror Nights every year in September or October. But I'm always, like I said before, curious to hear, like, hey, I could be wrong, or we all have different perspectives, right? Or different stories or experiences, right? So when I go to Halloween Horror Nights, like everything hits me in a certain way. It may not hit everybody else in the same way. So was really happy to be able to have that conversation with a buddy of mine. So that was really, really cool. The 10th most listened to episode this year was episode 19, Preparing for College with Jerry Prickal. So this was, I think I mentioned in the episode, was really, really fun, really interesting, and hit me in many different ways. So as a quick reminder, the way this episode came together, back in early to mid-November, I was with my family, and we're doing some college tours because my older daughter is currently a junior in high school, and we're kind of very early researching colleges. I was messaging with my buddy Brandon, or Marcus Brandon Percal, I guess his name is. Shout out to Marcus. And said, hey, we're doing college visits. This is what's happening. And he was like, hey, I think I have somebody who can help you out. Not me, though. My mom could. And initially, obviously, I thought that was just going to be a funny joke or, leading to a mom joke or something like that. But that wasn't the case. Marcus sent me his mom's information. We had a couple of brief conversations, and that led to the episode, which was really, really great. I really enjoyed talking to Marcus's mom, Jerry. Really, really interesting to me as well, because again, she is a college advisor. She can help out with things like that. And obviously, as we're, early in the process, definitely gave me a lot of learnings and helped me out there as well. Additionally, what was really cool was later in the week when I got back from Philadelphia, or actually even after the podcast was recorded, at my daughter's high school, they had a college night where the guidance counselors and the principal were talking about the college process and how to apply and such like that. So knowing that, I actually then posted a link to that episode into the Facebook group for my daughter's high school parents association, whatever else like that. And a number of them, I think, listened to the podcast for the first time. So I was happy that not only was I able to, learn about, how to apply to college, how to get ready for the process, but able to share both myself and Jerry's expertise, which was super, super helpful. Knowing that I graduated college or graduated high school like 30 plus years ago, I know the system's changed a lot. So back then, obviously, the internet wasn't really a thing. There were so many just things that have changed in the college experience and setup experience that I didn't go through back then. So to get as many different data points and helps as I could was something I was looking forward to, and it totally paid out. I think we've definitely learned a lot. Definitely shared it with some people. So I think myself, a lot of the people from my daughter's high school, as well as anybody else who randomly found this podcast based on keywords, I think hopefully benefited from it. So shout out to Jerry. Thank you so much again for your time and really, really appreciate it. And thanks to Marcus for setting that one up. The number 9th most streamed episode this year was episode 9, Family with Latanya Ford. So this was one that was really cool for me anyway, in the fact that it was episode 9. I had a podcast for a few weeks at this point. Word was getting out at my job that, hey, Jeff is a, quote, expert on podcasts. No, I don't know that I'd call myself an expert in anything at this point, but I guess compared to most people, I probably know a little bit more about podcasts than others. So she randomly shot me a message, and Latanya isn't somebody that I necessarily talk to or work with every day. I would occasionally talk to her or see her or whatever. And she just shot me a message like, hey, I hear you, on a podcast. I'd love to be a guest at some point. So I was like, that sounds great. Let's do it. I'm always looking for guests. I'm always looking to learn whatever I can, want to hear everyone's story. So for me, it was really great how it was set up. So this was a fun episode for me, hearing about her family. She has a very interesting situation in terms of like how close she is with her family, how she's family, like on the East Coast. Really, really great. I really appreciated and enjoyed talking to her. She has since left the company that I work for. But I did, before she left, reach out to her. I was like, hey, thanks again for being on the podcast. Congratulations. Hope nothing but great things happen to you in the future. And she said she'll keep listening. So Latanya Ford, if you are still listening, hey, Latanya, thanks again for being a guest this year. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we can catch up again sometime soon. The number 8 episode, most streamed episode for the year, was episode 3, Improv and Comedy with Rob Cosgrove. This was one of my early episodes. So what I will say, just being completely transparent, first of all, I had never met Rob before, and I had never talked to Rob before. Rob was someone that I had met via the Major Wrestling Figure podcast group, and I put out a note to a bunch of people that said, hey, if anybody wants to be a guest, let me know. I'd love to have you on as a guest. Rob immediately reached out. Was like, hey, I'm into improv and comedy, and I think I'd be an awesome guest. I have a lot to share, let's talk about. So I was like, absolutely. For myself as an interviewer, I think I've definitely evolved and gotten better as an interviewer since that conversation. That conversation was a little more challenging for me because it was the first episode that I recorded that I had very little knowledge on what the topic was. So obviously, I'm a fan of comedy, a fan of improv, but I know very little about the behind the scenes. The top 2 episodes, or episode 1 and episode 2, were about celebrity autographs and Disney, are 2 topics that I've personally experienced and personally been, I guess, let's say, behind the scenes on. So those are ones where I was able to kind of make myself a little bit more of the conversation, and I had better questions, I think, in terms of knowing how to get there, how to learn, how to share, kind of like how to get the story out of the person. This was the one that I kind of flew in, let's say, a little more naked, in terms of I didn't necessarily know great follow-up questions, and I wasn't quite there. Additionally, and this was a point that my wife Beth had made, and I completely agree with it. She had said to me that maybe don't open up with a huge intro about the guest anymore, because if the guest topic is improv and comedy, but we don't get to improv and comedy until about 20-25 minutes into the episode, it's kind of tough, and listeners or viewers may not necessarily understand what's going on or even care as much by the time you get up to the topic. So from there, I kind of learned, okay, open the show, give the guests maybe 30 to 45 seconds to introduce themselves, get into the topic, and then get into some more background stuff from there. So for me, again, episode 3, definitely learning, definitely helpful. Really enjoyed talking to Rob. Hope Rob is doing well. I do see him on the Facebook group from time to time. But again, like I said, this was very early in the podcast, and I was learning a lot on the fly. So this was one where I personally learned a lot. I mean, one of the purposes behind this podcast for me is to grow, to develop, to evolve, and to understand more about just other people's stories, but also at the same time get out of my shell. I think I've mentioned in the past, I am a bit of a, let's say, natural introvert, but I've become more of a hybrid over the years, just because in corporate America and just in life in general, that's kind of how it works sometimes. So this has definitely helped me out. So continuing on the journey, but for right now, here is where we are. Episode 10, 9, 8, 7. Okay, the 7th most streamed episode was episode 8, Immigrating to the United States with Lithia Baez. So this was a fun one for me. I've known Lithia for a number of years now. We worked together. Last couple of years, she moved into the town that I live in. Her older daughter goes to high school with both my daughters at this point as well. For me, this was a good one just because being born in New York, but living in New Jersey for 45 plus years or so at this point, I know very little about the experience of immigrating to a country, right? Not knowing the language, not knowing what to expect, all sorts of things like that. So for me, this was one of the first episodes that I learned a lot. I mean, there were early episodes I did learn a decent amount, but this is one that I would say wasn't based on like a hobby or just based on like, hey, I want to try it, do something. This was a topic about a person who, uplifted their entire life, moved from South America and moved to the United States, and all sorts of different life changes and evolutions over that time to where she is today. Lithia is amazing. Absolutely love Lithia to death. Really enjoyed the conversation. I've talked to Lithia recently about potentially having her on as a guest in another episode, a future episode, talking about trying new things as you get older. I'm in my late 40s. She's roughly around the same age as me. As you get older, it is tougher to try new things and do different things because, we tend to get stuck in our ways. We like routines. We like doing things the way they're usually being done. We don't like to, get outside of our comfort zone, I guess. So for me, at 46, I started a podcast. for her, I don't remember what she had said, but she said there are things that she's trying for the first time, later in life as well. So I'd love to have her as a future guest once again to talk about different things she's trying and kind of like the experience of it, right? So trying something new at 20 is very different than trying something new at 45 or 50. So really looking forward to having her back on as a guest again in the future. The sixth most streamed episode this year was episode number 10. I called it Solopod because it was the first podcast episode that I recorded completely by myself without a guest. In hindsight, I probably should have called this episode Jeff Seltzer is better than Jeff Seltzer or something like that. For those of you that didn't listen to or don't remember, this was an episode where I think I largely talked about sports in high school, jobs in high school, and things like that. And got into a lot of different things. One of the key topics that I got the most engagement on from people was a story that I told about how there was a Jeff Seltzer that was a all-state track athlete in Old Bridge, and two towns over there was a Jeff Seltzer that, let's say, was the opposite of all-state track in Edison, New Jersey. And the fact that over the years we've been confused for each other, lots of things have happened and such like that. He wrote a book about Disney. Again, something I would potentially do but didn't do. This was a fun topic to talk about. I've often alluded to the fact that I'm not the all-state track Jeff Seltzer from New Jersey from the 90s. I'm the other one. So now that I actually put it out on a podcast, I love the fact that now people get a little more of the inside joke. As a goof, I asked my wife if I should reach out to the other Jeff Seltzer to try to get him as a guest. She said, "Don't bother the guy. Let him live his life." So at this point, I'm probably not going to reach out. Probably won't have the other Jeff Seltzer on as a guest at some point. But if nothing else, I did put it into the world, and if it ever happens, it happens. We'll see what happens. The fifth most streamed episode for this year was one that I had mentioned or alluded to earlier. Episode 4, A Week in Philly with Daniel Ireland and Steve Fatt. So first of all, shout out to Daniel, shout out to Steve. Love those guys to death. Two of my favorite people to hang out with, as I did for almost a full week in Philadelphia back in April, as we spent countless hours at 13 wrestling shows over the course of 5 days. For me, this was a great episode, similar to the one on Halloween Horror Nights, and the fact that I got to experience something with some really good friends, and then afterwards got to reminisce about it on a podcast, and then actually document it. So I loved the fact that we were able to kind of talk about our different experiences, our perspectives, um, bring up some stories that happened, remind ourselves about things, kind of talk about some of the pictures, some things that we collected. Um, as most people know, I'm a huge wrestling fan. So for me, this is something that like basically forever I've always wanted to do. Go to the town where WrestleMania is, stay there for the week, go to as many different wrestling shows as I could. Historically, I've done this before, but usually by myself. But in the last few years, I've made a couple of friends in Daniel and Steve who are just as big in wrestling as I am, and just as interested in spending some dumb money on wrestling events as well. So really enjoyed the time, really enjoyed the stories, really enjoyed going back and forth with the two of them. This was, I would say, also an episode where I learned very quickly that my guests' technology is very important. Loved the conversation, loved everything about it. The only, I'd say, challenge that I have as I try to listen to it back is I think it was Steve's microphone just didn't quite sound right. Um, Sounds like me and Daniel are in the same room, and Steve is on a walkie-talkie in another room. So this is one where, as I have guests, I try to work through what it is, how they're set up, what it looks like. Not necessarily looks like visually, but in terms of like making sure that everything's set up as it needs to be. Additionally, and it wasn't on this episode, but there were a couple other episodes that I'm not going to necessarily call out. But the Wi-Fi and some of my guests over the last year have been hit or miss. Most guests have really, really good Wi-Fi. I've had a couple where I've lost them halfway through or partially through the conversation, which can be super frustrating, especially considering for the most part I go live to tape on these episodes and I don't edit after the fact. So A, trying to figure out if they are off the Wi-Fi, and B, trying to just talk while I'm waiting for them to come back on and figure out what's going on with them. So definitely, a learning for myself is for future guests, continue to make sure that they have the best possible Wi-Fi that they can going into the episode, and making sure that they understand what's going on, making sure that they're as comfortable as possible. So before each episode, just a little shot behind the curtain, I do give each guest a little bit of a speech talking about making sure that everyone recognizes that whatever we're saying here or doing here, we're recording and we're putting out into the the interwebs, right? So anything that you put out there is going to be there that future employers can hear or see, friends and family, things like that. So just be mindful of what it is that you say. If there's something you're uncomfortable at, or if something that you don't want to put out there, like don't put it out there. Additionally, this is episode number 24, and somehow not a single curse has been uttered on this podcast. So I've been able to go without the expletive content checked off for the podcast as I publish it out. Will that continue? I don't know. I don't plan on cursing, but again, with other guests coming on the show, you never know what's going to happen. So, 24 episodes in, no curses. We'll see what happens going forward and kind of keep learning as we can from there. Next up, the fourth most streamed episode was episode 7, Passionate Fandom with Christina. This was an episode that I learned I did enjoy a lot. This is also one similar to Rob, where I had never actually interacted with or talked to the guests up until they came onto the podcast, or like right before we went live. Christina, as a reminder, is a huge fan of AEW wrestler Orange Cassidy. We've been connected via social media for a couple of years now, and we've messaged. But this is the first time that I actually talked to her. Really fun. I love the fact that I was able to put out a female's perspective in professional wrestling. As any of you have gone to a wrestling show in the past, you'll see that it is strong majority male. Definitely a stereotype out there. So being able to share the view of a female, understand what she likes, what she doesn't like, what gets her to shows, and honestly, she's probably more passionate about wrestling than I am, which is saying a lot. In the fact that she's gone to more shows than me, she goes to a lot more meets and greets than me, things like that. So really enjoyed learning about Christina's story, how she got into wrestling or back into wrestling during COVID times. And again, just hearing about her travels and her experiences across the show. So Christina, if you're listening, thanks again. Really appreciate you being on the show, and hopefully we'll chat again sometime soon. The number 3 most streamed episode this year was episode 6, DIY Projects with Stephanie and Tracy Romano. So first of all, I do want to shout out and congratulate Stephanie and Christina. Stephanie and Tracy, who just formalized their wedding, or their wedding vows, a few weeks ago. Had a huge party. Really, really excited for them. 2 amazing ladies. Really enjoyed talking to them back over the summer. It was one of my first episodes that I'd recorded. I learned a lot from them. DIY, as I mentioned on the episode, is something that I have very little knowledge, interest, or involvement in. Generally, I'll hire a handyman. I'll figure something out like that. I just throw money at situations. I really don't enjoy doing stuff around the house. Versus these 2, they love it. Like, they'll build dog houses. They design their entire interiors for their houses. All sorts of stuff to do on their own that I just don't have the capability, or I guess maybe the patience for. I don't know. But with that said, really enjoyed talking to them. Shout out to Jamie Romano, who is probably 9+ months pregnant at this point. So Jamie is Stephanie's sister. The way the episode came together was I was talking over the summer with Jamie, and I was trying to figure out a way to get her on the podcast. She didn't necessarily have a topic for herself, or didn't really know what she wanted to talk about. But she was like, hey, but my sister does DIY stuff. You should get her on. So she introduced myself to Stephanie. We started having a conversation, and it kind of went from there. So it was great. Additionally, this was one of my few episodes where it was myself and 2 guests. But I think the 3 of us played off of each other very well. Fun conversation. Really enjoyed it. If you're into DIY, definitely would highly recommend going back and listening to episode 6 and hearing about my conversation with both Stephanie and Tracy. What I will say now is this. So the top 2 most streamed episodes were very close from a streaming perspective. Like, I mean, close as in within a few streams of each other. Interesting, too, in that the top 2 episodes were the first 2 episodes that were recorded and published by me this year on Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. Interesting also, and I guess this shouldn't be surprising to me either, that the top 2 episodes have significantly more streams than the rest of the episodes. I'll say it's probably because this was when I first put out a lot of my first social media and communication saying, hey, I have a podcast, check it out. So much like any TV show or any podcast or magazine, whatever else like that, right? There's a lot of curiosity initially, right? Like, I'd imagine my friends and family were like, hey, Jeff's got a podcast. This is awesome. Let's take a listen. Will you listen to 1 or 2 episodes? Maybe. Will you listen to 24 episodes? Probably not, if you don't have a huge amount of interest in all the topics. But, I do appreciate all the people that have listened to all the episodes throughout time. But I fully recognize, why the first 2 episodes probably had the most listens. Additionally, I'll say this, the top 2 episodes did have probably two of the more mainstream types of topics. So, with that said, the number two most streamed episode this year was episode number one, Celebrity Autographs with Dana Runberg. So Dana is somebody, as some of you may know, who I had kind of informally met via like message boards and the web, whatever else like that, probably about like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago or so. Back then, he was more of just a collector. He would go to, I guess, he would know where celebrities were going to be, track them down, and get autographs. More recently, he's done a fantastic job with Marked Out and with his podcast with his buddy Sean. Marked Out Radio, great podcast, check it out, where they turned it into a business where now they do like private signings with celebrities and wrestlers and stuff like that. They do a lot of really, really great stuff. So shout out to Marked Out and Marked Out Radio. This was the first episode that I recorded, and this definitely, obviously, I've learned a lot since then. I think I've evolved a lot since then. Number one, what I did learn from that was always make sure the guest knows that it's both audio and video ahead of time. Dana was not aware before we started recording, or up until we started recording, that it'd be video as well. So he's sitting out, I think, on his deck in his backyard. I don't know that he would have necessarily framed it up that way versus another way if he knew it was going to be video. But with that said, it was great conversation. I learned a lot from Dana every time that I hear from him or talk to him or listen to his podcast. Celebrity autographs is something that I've always been interested in, not necessarily to the level of Dana, but like I've told the story before about how like it was about like 2013 when I was on an airplane with a bunch of the Connecticut Sun, the WNBA basketball team out of Connecticut, where I sat in first class. They all sat in the back of the plane. And we were flying from Newark, New Jersey to Los Angeles, California. And I spent the entire 5 or 6 hours of the flight trying to figure out a way to get a picture or an autograph of or with at least one of the basketball players. As soon as the plane landed, I got off the plane. And then I went over and tracked down one of the players, got a picture. Kelsey Griffin. No one's probably ever heard of her before. I think she plays in Australia now if she's still playing. But for me, it was a case of like I needed something, I don't know, something for myself to A, prove that this all happened, and B, I wanted to make it a great story. So for me, like, if it coincidentally happens, I will do it. Same thing if like I'm at a wrestling show and I see a wrestler, who's, let's say, not on the show, but is hanging out, try to get a picture, versus Dana is a little more proactive, let's say, in terms of planning out his days around finding wrestlers or celebrities, musicians, whatever else like that, and tracking them down to get a picture or autograph as well. He's got a lot of really great just autograph posters and pictures and all sorts of stuff like that. So he's done a great job. I really enjoy seeing everything he's done and everything he has in his PC or his personal collection, as they call it. The number one most streamed episode of the year is a guest who I've had on the show twice now, and is obviously about a topic that I have a lot of heart for and really, really love. So the most streamed episode in 2024 was episode number 2, Disney World with Megan Fernandez. So Megan is, just real quick background on this as a reminder, Megan lives in my town. Her daughter and my younger daughter are the same age, and up until last year went to school together. Either through like Girl Scouts or sports or something. The two of us had gotten connected at some point, but I wouldn't necessarily say that up until now we've been friends or we really talk. Over the summer, when I was going to start the podcast, I had posted, "Hey, I'm going to start a podcast. Anybody want to be on it as a guest?" She immediately reached out and was like, "Hey, you love Disney. I love Disney. Let's do an episode about Disney World." And I was like, "That sounds great." For me, it was an easy way to get my foot in the water with the podcast. Like I said before, a topic that I have a lot of interest for, I have a lot of knowledge of. She goes to Disney World multiple times a year. I do the same. Lots of great stories, lots of great experiences. And it's great. Like I message with her a lot more frequently now than I did previously. If she's going on a trip to Florida or I'm going on, we'll kind of, share stories or share topics or try to like learn from each other, which is great. And so much so that, episode 2 happened, which was amazing. Like I said, number 1 most streamed episode for the year. And then beyond that, a few months later, her and I separately both went to Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween and recorded an episode that I think came out in late October. So definitely was a lot of fun. This podcast is bringing people together. I mean, in another world without this podcast, Megan and I never would have had that conversation. We'd be kind of like, 2 Facebook acquaintances. But now because of the podcast and because of this, let's say, forced conversation that I've tried to create upon myself, we've had a lot more conversations. We're a bit closer. It's just really nice, really great. Additionally, shout out to Megan, who just celebrated a birthday last week. So happy birthday, Megan. Hope you did have an amazing time with your friends and family and doing whatever it is that you ended up doing. So that's the top 11 or so episodes most streamed this year. A lot of fun, a lot of great conversations. I've learned a lot, right? So the idea is everybody has a story with Jeff Seltzer. People share their stories. I share my stories. I feel that I've shared a lot with my listening and viewing audience, maybe too much at times, but that's life sometimes. I've learned a lot and I've listened to topics that I've never would have really had conversations about, right? I had conversations with like Amit about flying an airplane. I had a conversation with my buddy John Cevallos about training to be a cage fighter while working in a cubicle, right? Like topics that I might have a little bit of knowledge on, but not that much. I learned a lot about people's experiences, and not just that, but how it impacts people around them as well. So, Amit is a airplane pilot, as a hobby, learning about how, it impacted his parents, how he got the love of flying an airplane from his dad, who flew an airplane, how, his family, his kids, his wife, his friends, how it impacts all of them. So for me, a lot of it is the story isn't just like, hey, I went to Disney World. It's, hey, I went to Disney World and I ran into so and so, and we had a great time and we did this and they did that and we shared that, right? It's the whole, all the layers of the story is run what you get at. So always trying to learn what I can, experience what I can, and hear from other people and help them share their stories as well. I've created a platform of sorts this past year where at any point I can get on and kind of either rant and rave about something, say, hey, I had a great time with this, or this didn't work out as well as I wanted to. Because in life, right, not everything's going to go as perfectly as we want it to go. Some things, you plan things out, you do it, and you're like, hey, this was great because, or wasn't great because of that. So for me, a lot of it is trying to learn what I can, trying to get myself better, and hopefully do better next time and enjoy it better the next time. So for me, that's a lot of it. Additionally, what I wanted to share was some other just random, stats about the podcast of kind of like the reach that I've had. So I think I've mentioned in the past, as of today, so Christmas Eve 2024, December 24th, this episode, not this episode, but this show has been streamed in 12 different countries, 5 different continents. So not surprisingly, most of the listens were in the United States, but we've been listened to in United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, Russia, Israel, Mexico, El Salvador, Japan, the Netherlands, Australia, and Ireland. So, in another world, or if let's say 30 years ago, I tried to do something like this on a, video or a tape recording, nobody outside of my house would have heard it. But the fact that with technology and just the way that, the internet works, I can put out a silly little show and people all over the world can listen to it, which is just crazy to me. Granted, I'd say it's good and it's bad, right? It's good in the fact that you can get your word out, but it's bad in the fact that, every conspiracy theorist out there can do something, put it out there, and all of a sudden, instead of me yelling at my wall that, aliens are coming or whatever it is, now people out there are hearing it. And if one person hears it and agrees, and they can share it. And then this is how conspiracy theories just tend to, get bigger and bigger and, expand, I guess, or share out. So I guess there's good things, there's bad things about it. Everybody has a voice, everybody has a story. It is what it is. I don't know. Outside of that, some other random information about the show that we've got, 6 months in or so in, is looking at some of the other stats. Not surprisingly, do have a slightly male skew in terms of show listeners, being that I do have a couple of wrestling episodes and probably things that let's say females are a little less interested in. I'm not surprised that I do have such a, I guess, a higher male listener than a female listener. Although it is a fairly clean split. It's like 45-55 in terms like that. So it's pretty close, I guess. It's a little more male, but males and females both listen to the show. Lastly, from a demo, most listens are in the 35 to, let's say, 59 age group. Being that I'm a 47-year-old male sharing my perspectives, that's not surprising. My daughters, who are both in high school, have little to no interest in listening to the podcast, which is fine. They say it's grown-up speak and a lot of things like that. So, when I was 16, 17 years old, did I want to hear a 50-year-old guy talking about whatever? I don't know. Maybe not. But either way, that's kind of where we are today. We are running a little late in time, so I just wanted to kind of quickly shout out a couple of things from this past year that I am super proud of. So 2024 is coming to an end. Big year. A lot of things happened this year. It's been a great year for me personally and professionally as well. Professionally, I've had a lot of fun at my work. Again, not talking too much about it, but the fact that I think I work on a great team. I have a lot of great people around me at work. Really, from a work perspective, it's definitely the job that I've liked the most, and the company I've enjoyed the most over my 25-year corporate America career. So I have that going for me, which is helpful. Back in June, July, as I mentioned a while ago, my wife, myself, and my kids went to Japan, which for me was my first time leaving North America, which is crazy, right? 47-year-old guy. Never leaving the continent. Been to Canada a bunch of times, went to Mexico for about 5 minutes, but never left North America. So going to Japan was definitely a bit of a stretch from a time zone perspective, from a flight perspective, but it was great. I mean, Tokyo Disney for a week and a half. We went to a Stardom wrestling show in downtown Tokyo, saw some of the sites. We did Ferris wheel karaoke, which was incredible. So overall, it was awesome. Can I do that kind of a trip all the time? I don't think I'm physically built for that. The podcast started probably about a week or two after I came back from Japan. And just being perfectly honest, I was probably still a little jet lagged. As when I was in Japan, I don't know that I ever fully adjusted to Tokyo time. And then coming back from Japan, I was just a disaster. Took me probably about a week and a half to fully get back to New Jersey time. I'm not built for it. I need my Eastern time zone. I need my 8 hours sleep at night. Flying that far around the world definitely just confused my brain, let's say. So definitely some learnings for next time in terms of how I would travel and maybe not go, 12-hour time zones away. Maybe we should start with Europe next time, maybe England or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. From an overall family perspective, it's been an amazing time as well. So firstly, as I've mentioned before, shout out to my wife, Beth. We had our 20th wedding anniversary this year, which is crazy to me that we've been married for 20 years. It doesn't feel like 20 years, but at the same time, I also have trouble remembering life before Beth. I don't think I want to. Life has been amazing. Love my wife. Life is just great. So been an awesome time, but 20 years is 20 years. I mean, I've read somewhere that like only 65% of marriages last 20 years or more. I think about 50% last 25 or more. So I guess we hit the average mark in about 5 years, and hopefully we'll go well beyond that. But as a data geek, little things like this jump out at me at times. My kids have been amazing. My older daughter Robin got her driver's license this year, which is a huge milestone. Really, really proud of her. Really excited for her. Really proud for all of us. I mean, it's been life-changing in that now she's a little more self-sufficient. She can drive wherever she wants for the most part. Definitely makes our lives a little bit easier. My younger daughter started high school. She's done amazing as well. She joined the soccer team, the basketball team, doing amazing in both those teams. Really happy to see both my daughters progress. They both seem very happy. Love to see it. Obviously, we always wanted to give our kids what we didn't have, or at least make life better for them than it was for us. So always happy. It makes me smile to seeing how great they're doing, how much they seem to be enjoying life, and just kind of like how much, I guess how much better of a high school experience they're having versus what I had. So really excited to see that. Not in any order either. I did my basically it was like a bucket list trip, as I mentioned earlier, when I went to WrestleMania week in Philly back in April. Doing that many shows in 1 week, just doing everything, right? Staying up till 4 or 5 a.m. almost every day, and then doing it again the next day. Didn't think I could do it, but it was awesome. Had two great teammates that went with me, so it was so much fun. Let's see. Did want to once again shout out, I guess, the people who gave me the idea for this podcast. So once again, as for those who don't remember, I was a guest on the Major World Order, the MWO podcast back in April. So shout out to Billy Husvar and Jake. Without that podcast and without that was like my gateway into podcasting. They invited me on. I had a lot of fun with them. So much so that Gina, a friend of mine, had said, "Hey, you should do your own podcast," which is kind of what gatewayed me into creating my own podcast. So again, Gina was super helpful. Jake, Billy, and Husfar were super helpful as well in terms of as I was trying to get up and running on the podcast, like little questions, right? Like there's not really a guidebook to, hey, I want to start a podcast. Here's what I do. But they set me up with like, okay, we use StreamYard to record. Here's the kind of microphone I use, and kind of little things like that. And throughout the year, also, even after the podcast started, they've always been kind of a sounding board that I can ask them questions, and they help me out, which has really been really, really great. So thanks again to those guys. Lastly, I wanted to thank, obviously, all of my guests, everybody who's taken time out of their day and out of their life to come on the podcast and share their story, specifically to both John and Megan, who were repeat guests. So not only did they come on the podcast and share their story and help me out, but they came on again. So again, Megan and John, amazing. Totally happy that you guys are able to join me on this journey. You guys are obviously welcome again in future episodes. I'm sure we'll create a topic or figure something out going forward to make that happen. With that said, I did want to, I guess, close out the year or close out the episode with just a reminder that this is episode 24, the last episode of this year. Probably taking a few weeks off. I'll come back sometime in probably, let's say, mid to late January. have a lot of really great guests, including one guest who I just heard from today, or potential guest, I guess, heard from today, who committed to it. So hopefully we'll get him on the show. If this does come through, this is something that I am super, super excited about. We'll share more about it in the near future. If and when it does come to fruition, really excited to talk to this person and pick this person's brain and just kind of get their story out there. So really, really hopeful that it happens. We'll see what happens from there. With that said, as a reminder to everybody, we are available on all podcast platforms. You know that because you found me here. Reminder, please go on Instagram and follow, like, comment, all the fun stuff at Everybody Has a Story Pod. We are on YouTube at Everybody Has a Story Pod. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. You can reach the show directly via email at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com if you want to be a sponsor. If there's something you want to share with me, if you want to send to me that you can't send on Instagram, that's the way to do it. For all things Jeff Seltzer, you can find me over at jeffseltzer.com. With that said, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, happy everything. I hope everyone's having an amazing year. Definitely we'll be off for the next few weeks, but definitely shoot me a note, shoot me a message via Instagram or via email if you have something you want to say, if you want to be a future guest. I'm here for it. Would love the engagement, would love to have the conversation. Let's see what we can set up going forward. As next year, looking to set up some guests. At the same time, we'll probably set up some more solo pods, and we'll see how it goes. Anyhow, have an amazing day, have an amazing holiday, and we'll talk next year. Thank you so much. Bye.